Good evening, everyone. Tonight, special guest, comics creator extraordinaire, Dan Evans. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
All right, I think I have to switch this over because it's there we go. The way my camera's set up, it was bothering me that I'm looking away from you. So okay.
I'm only slightly disrespected.
So first time on the show, you've got a brand new book, Biophile Kolga.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about it.
All right. It's part of the Godfoe Universe, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Biophile Colga is a kind of modern noir pulp. It's dark, it's funny, it's got action and adventure. It covers the gamut of genres really well. We think so. It is very much a bright, colorful book, as you can tell from the colors, of course, and it's one of a kind. It's very unique. It's a completely unique and new character. It takes place in our universe, which I said I'll get into. It's not disorienting, and it's not alienating. We've had reviews, people we don't know, we've sent it to, they've read it. It has had nothing but positive reviews, great reviews for the characters in particular, and the story itself. It's 100 pages, full color. It's a standalone book unto itself, but it's volume one, and the story will continue and will resolve by about volume five. We are creating a whole universe called the Godfoe Universe, which is about an alternate Earth where being calling itself God has, or capital G, capital O, capital D, has taken over Earth, and anyone who opposes it is a God foe. So our first book, Apollyon 20XX, kind of introduced that idea, and this is also in the same timeline. But like I said, you can read them as two separate stories and get a story unto itself, or you can enjoy them as a greater overarching narrative. That's what everything we do in our universe, how that works.
Okay. So would you say that this is a sequel then?
No, it takes place about 1,000 years after Apollyon. It is like it's in the same timeline. So when you get this and you get Apollyon, you get some later stuff we're doing, you'll see this big arching narrative that you could call a sequel, but they're not direct sequels. Like, you're not going to miss anything if you pick up this book or any of the other
Ah,
books. Yep. We want people to jump in our timeline anywhere and get a solid 100% story without having to worry about the greater narrative, but it is a bigger experience if you read all of them.
okay.
Yep.
Um, so what is it about this kind of genre, about this world that really excited you? Like what made, because you could say like, oh, that's a nice idea, that's a nice idea, but to actually take the time to sit down and start creating, and then instead of just doodling, you're like, oh crap, I need to finish this thing. Like what brought you to that point?
Well, and just to clarify, because I can't take credit for his work, our artist is Josh Adams. He does all the inks, he does all the drawings, coloring, everything. I just write. So the doodle question may be better for him. I just tell him to do stuff. But I created the Godfoe universe with Josh about 10 years ago. We've been working on this for about a decade. I kind of got this idea of very apocalyptic idea of things and the way the world's kind of headed, and we really wanted to say, like, what if we took this idea of like this totalitarian force that ruled for a very long time and explored the different people throughout different all of history who would oppose it and how they're treated. I mean, because that's a cycle that kind of repeats all of humankind. Like, no matter where humans are, we tend to set up either people or institutions as like the number one arbiter of truth, and then bad stuff tends to happen like that. So that's what really kicked off the idea. The idea for Biophile Kolga came from really wanting to do a character study, really wanted to go into kind of the witchy and horror side of things, and the Cthulian kind of mythos and that kind of darker kind of stuff, while also keeping it lighter. It's a character study of a character called Biophile Kolga. That's the title. Her name comes from a group she was a part of called the Biophile Initiative that was trying to basically disprove God as God. And it kind of fell apart. They were labeled as heretics, labeled as God foes, and she's the last survivor of that. She's lived a very long time, a full life, about 80 or 90 years old, and what she thought would be her last mission has actually left her with her youth restored and a new body. And with that, her emotions haven't changed. Her past hasn't changed. Her anger is still there. Her bitterness is still there, and of course, her love for her ward, June, who is kind of like her sidekick. But it's a person who reached into their life thinking they tied everything kind of off, and being faced with a new reality of, did my life matter, and did I make a difference, and exploring that idea a lot. And that's kind of heady, and I get maybe even somebody might call it a little pretentious, but it's done in a very fun way, in a very entertaining way, to really explore morality, mortality, um, and the horror side of things. Because she fights some witches from her past. She fights kind of those other kind of beings that are more on the magical side of things. There's no actual magic in our universe. It's all science it's so far advanced that it appears to be magic, and everybody just kind of treats it that way. But this book, especially going with the neo noir kind of style, it gave us freedom to go with a monologue that is told from Kolga's perspective, and really get to explore the life of a person who's lived for a very long time. They think they're not going to be surprised by anything new, and instead find that the longer you live, the more you are surprised.
Hmm, that's interesting. So what kind of things would surprise Kolga?
Well, the main things is that people don't change, and that people do change. The enemies she had may not stay as enemies, and the friends that she had don't always stay as friends.
Oh,
She's also
interesting.
she's also in a world that is run by a unbelievably powerful being called God, and there are other things that serve God and don't, that possess unimaginable power, and that's the key plot line for this book. On her last mission, Kolga retrieves something called the Eye of the Fallen. It's this sentient eye that's in a lantern, and his name is Stu, which is for stupendous, because he didn't know what a name was, and someone said a name is what people call you, and he wanted to be called Stupendous. So
Hmm.
he's kind of the comic relief. He's funny until he's terrifying. He's kind of an eldritch horror that doesn't know he's an eldritch horror. So she's discovering these things about the world and reality, things that she thought weren't real. Like, okay, are these beings that are kind of supernatural, or those old wives' tales, or are they actually real? And then the older she gets, and the more she goes, and the more she learns with her ward June, and the more that her past catches up with her, the world becomes more and more and more terrifying around them. And that takes her by surprise a good bit. And we like to explore those things. Those are the fun things. But of course, the main thing, like I said, is it's kind of a character study. So we like to always kind of keep it grounded within her thoughts and within her emotions.
Hmm.
I know I'm saying a lot, and we're taking a big risk here. I understand that it's a very unique world. It is our Earth. Like I said, it's an alternate Earth. It's the very far future. Apollyon 20XX, our first book, which funded and did very well, took place around our timeline. It was kind of like Akira meets X-Men, and it's still going. And this is asking a little bit more of people, and we realize that. It is it seems more far-fetched when you haven't read it. The second someone picks it up, they're grounded.
Interesting.
Yep.
So one thing that I've noticed is somewhere in the last 30 to 40 years, there's really been a lack of sci-fi.
Yep.
And I personally think it's because we've hit a level where a lot of like the amazing parts of
Yeah.
sci-fi are everyday life. So when you're doing sci-fi, how do you go about reaching that technological level that seems like it could be possible without going straight over, like you said, to the it's so far ahead it's magic?
Well, we did a little bit of both. With Kolga, we established that the technology at the time, particularly something they called old metal, which is an abbreviation of folk variation of old metal. It's OLMEATAL. It is what we introduced in Apollyon 20XX called Impera metal, which was an alien metal that landed on Earth, and it can basically interact with biological substances. And that, in our world, that's where the technological advancements of the 20th century came from, which explained the iPhone and the internet and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of did it both ways. And I'm going to answer your question because that is a very, and you're the first person to ask that and actually talk about that. And that's a very fascinating topic that Josh and I go over, because we have a problem with what we call the Appleification of everything, which is, yeah, sci-fi went from either really gritty or kind of Flash Gordon, Flash Gordon-esque, to very bland and very sterile, very and they did it well, but Minority Report,
Hmm.
like with Tom Cruise, everything's white, everything's bright, it looks like an Apple store. And to me, that's the worst sci-fi, is the Apple sci-fi. So we wanted to do the opposite end of those. We wanted to go very visceral with Apollyon, which is kind of like body cybernetic stuff that looks more like flesh. And we wanted to go in the future with Kolga, where it's kind of more magical. It's the same technology, it's just grown and evolved. But it's a fine line. Like the big thing that we talk about a lot, and we're both musicians, actually, that's how we met. We talk about the same thing in music that we do with art, and that's in visual art as well. Texture. Texture seems to be missing, especially from digital art and comics. And it doesn't have to be that
Yeah.
way. You can do anything with digital art. Josh has done an amazing job, but the metronome, auto tune, there's not what they used to call dirt or used to call grit
Hmm.
on music. It's not on any kind of art anymore. It's
Yeah.
and that I think that's a long-winded way I understand of trying to answer your question. I think that's what we have found as the solution to avoiding the boring and Apple side of technology.
Hmm. That's interesting. So then, did you find that when you were starting to write this, that noir just automatically paired itself really well with the sci-fi that you were trying to create, or did you have to sort of work it in, how to mesh those two?
It came actually very naturally, because we kind of treat it. It feels very Victorian age. It feels very Sherlock,
Hmm.
a little Shakespearean. I don't, that's not to compare my writing to Shakespeare, but it is of that style, very Baroque actually. And I understand that those are two different time periods, so the history majors can get mad at me, but they'll know what I'm saying. Cobblestone streets, those kind of things, lanterns, that kind of idea mixes very well. This kind of penny dreadfuls
Ah.
mix very well with technology when you kind of treat it as an alternate religion and an alternate technology. Again, I'm trying to convey it well. The book sells itself much better with its pictures than I could do it, and I mean that boldly. I'm not going to apologize for making something unique. Like that's
Mhm.
that's a losing strategy. I feel like we have created something really wonderful, and that when people read it, it clicks a lot better than me trying to explain
No, I understand where you're coming from.
it. Yeah.
There's a point in development that I always call sailing the sea of despair, which
Okay.
is where like maybe you have things written, and you're like, well, I think I did a good job. And if you're doing the art, like maybe, well, okay, I've got like all these thumbnails,
Yeah.
which are the important part. I got the layouts, but it's not until you really sort of start to get those finished pages where you're like, yes. Um, so I hear what you're saying. Um, so what were you and Josh? What is it that inspired you guys? Um,
For this book, we for myself, for Josh, I know lots of heavy metal magazine. We're huge fans of Akira. We're huge fans of anime, bright color anime. Like I said, our first book, Apollyon, is black and white. That was more manga looking. We really wanted to do something that our 12-year-old selves would love. Um, really wanted to mix in, like I said, texture, and we really wanted to. You're about my age, I'd assume, late 30s, early 40s, I would assume.
I'm pushing 50, but thank you.
Okay, well, you look great for it. In that case, you'll definitely remember. You remember the Image Comics revolution.
Oh yeah, yeah, of course.
Wonderful artists, not the best writers. Um,
Yes.
yeah, but something kind of happened, at least in our view. This is something Josh and I talked about, which ties into your question. It feels like people thought it was kind of like the 80s for guitar, where people thought that comics were pushed to their technical brilliance.
Hmm.
And you could argue that. I mean, I would argue that something like Cerebus and some French comics kind of did that before Image, but I
Yeah.
get Image, and I love McFarlane. I've got the first 100 issues of Spawn. Him and Capullo
Wow.
defined my childhood. I got them right here. Um, but we felt like after that, especially mainstream comics, things fell off very hard. And it's kind of like what happened in the 90s. I'm a child of the 90s. I loved Soundgarden. I love those kind of groups, but
Hmm.
comics and music went to bubblegum very quickly in the 90s.
Yeah.
They went from grunge, we can say the extreme, like the Image stuff, but it jumped quickly to boy bands and it jumped quickly to what we kind of see as comics now, where the art went to crap and the writing went even worse. That something got lost there. Something got lost between the complete sterilization of art and its extreme boundary pushing. And what we wanted to do with our stuff, particularly Kolga, because with Apollyon, we kind of went with a grittier, more punk style. With Kolga, we kind of wanted to say, what if? What if we had taken that 90s kind of renaissance and you didn't try to push more extreme, you didn't try to push more grit? What if you tried to go more of the indie route of the 90s, like kind of like how Dave McKean did a little
Hmm.
bit with some of the Sandman covers? And again, I was a big fan of Cerebus and that kind of stuff. We basically wanted to take, because we know comics, you know comics, most people know comics, but we really wanted to explore the alternative route. And I know I'm talking a lot, but it's this idea of what if comics had gone from, what if they'd got to have their more kind of alternative underground movement that music kind of got before it turned into bubblegum pop.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So so before we get back to the book, I
Yeah.
really want to know, what do you think happened? Because my what happened to the comic industry is,
Yeah.
like, you see those detective movies where they've got like pictures on a board with a bunch of
Yeah.
strings connecting
Yeah.
them. That's like what my whole thesis of where the hell did we go wrong went.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what do you think was it in the, because you're absolutely right. Um, Image came out and the books looked gorgeous when they came out. They were,
Mhm.
most of them were very late, but they were just mostly unreadable. I
Yeah.
mean, you'd buy them like to for the covers for posters or something, not as an actual book. So what do you think happened?
I think it was art repeating music, and not intentionally, but and not a direct parallel. But we saw it happen with the '80s. We saw the '80s hair band. We saw pop reach kind of its
Hmm.
pinnacle. I mean, you had Michael Jackson and Eddie Van Halen on the
Yep.
same songs, for God's sake. Like that's unheard of. That we would get that much talent in one room, and then you kind of had the '90s grunge revolution, which I'm a child of. I get it, but it burned out so quickly. It wasn't sustainable. And part of course, was heroin, and part of it was
Yeah.
that none of those guys had the machismo to stand up to the bigger industry, kind of like the '80s hair band guys did. They weren't the most masculine dudes.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I mean, there's, other than
yeah,
like Smashing Pumpkins, who, I guess Pearl
yeah,
Jam's still around.
yeah. And I mean, Billy Corgan changed my life. The Siamese Dream is the reason I became a musician, literally.
Wow.
Um, yeah, that's a whole other story I could go into. But they kind of faded out, faded away, and it got commercialized very quickly. And the same thing happened with comics. And what you said, I think the only one in Image that was a businessman was McFarlane. The other guys just they were already ground under the corporate wheel. And
Hmm.
when they stepped, nobody likes to talk about this. I don't mean it mean. I wasn't there. Those guys are way more successful than me. But when they branched out on their own, the only one that kind of stayed on his own was McFarlane.
Yeah.
And that was almost sheer luck that he got into toys. He's a brilliant artist, wonderful artist, great toy designer, but even he will say, like, luckily I got into toys. um, I think the machine ground it up. I think in it, the rock stars went out, they made their fortune, and then the sad truth is they got eaten back up by the machine. Jim Lee went back to DC. Um, I think Marvel later. Some of them just dispersed, and we just kind of picked up. They kind of, I think, the big guys picked up the pieces, and I think they learned from their mistake. That's the unfortunate thing, is that the corporate guys always learn from their mistakes because money's involved, and that's what they care about. And I think what they decided, I don't know if it was in their heart or their intention, we're not going to have rock star artists anymore.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened with, speaking as a musician, that's what the synthesizer did. That's what DJs did. That's what Pro Tools did. It's like, look, we're not going to have superstar rock stars anymore. We're going to have Taylor Swift. We're going to have people that we can build. I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but like she gave that speech at the Grammys one year about women empowerment, and it's her standing up there with a Grammy and 5 men producers behind her. And it's like, those guys wrote the songs. I know those guys wrote the songs. I think it's, and we can go into a whole socio-political thing, but like that's what they said happened even after Occupy Wall Street. That's when we started getting the more DEI stuff and the more woke stuff, is when companies realized we don't have to have a target demographic. We can kind of dilute this, and we can break it, and we can control it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Because you mentioned the indie scene in the 90s. Being a little bit older than you, I remember the indie scene in the 80s. Like, did you ever discover books like I think it was done printing probably by the time you got around, but books like ElfQuest?
Oh yeah.
And you mentioned Cerebus. He was good until he sort of lost his mind, and like
issue 200, and after that you can be done. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember picking it up where there was like 2 or 3 pages just of text, and it's like, is this a comic? What? But I think in the late 70s to 80s there was a great indie scene, and even to the point where not all, but a lot of comic book stores had a porno section, where you would have to go through like a curtain or a special door to get in there. One of these days, I'm going to make a video about that whole thing. Not that I particularly want porn comics, but just that the industry was so free and so vibrant. You could make smut and it would sell. Whereas like now we're kind of sort of in a renaissance like that, because we can cut out the middleman and we can go directly to the consumer. And if you look at Kickstarter, big tittied comic girls are like, those are what sell over there. So, what's old is new.
We call those cheesecake.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because for some reason, most people I talk to love the comics of the 90s. And not that I hated them, but they don't see that like that's really where things started to go off the wheels.
Well, they almost crucified Razorfist for saying that. He did a whole video on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like, but I agree with you. Like, and of course the bubble happened. Marvel went under, and then some guy named Ralph Macchio, who wasn't the Karate Kid, had to come in, and no, like it was the beginning of that excess. Like, I'm not trying to be mean, but none of those guys were businessmen. Like it is wonderful to think about the spirit of Image and the spirit of punk, but you've got to sustain it. And you mentioned Billy Corgan, like that guy was kind of the McFarlane of that era. He was business minded. He understood the business, and like people hated him at the time for it because he knew how to play the game. He's like, no, my band's going to be here in 30 years. Like, yours is going to burn out because they're going to give you money. You're going to make 4 records, and they're going to ship you off because you don't know what to do with it. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but no, I 100% agree with you.
No, that's and it just makes me think of like the punk era, how many of those bands weren't around, like the Ramones. Johnny Ramone was the only one who like had Johnny. He was the one who had all the business savvy and like kept that going.
And what a
But
shame because arguably, in my opinion, arguably the best punk band ever. That they're considered cliche because they're everywhere, but I mean, you can't top those songs. Everybody knows those songs, and they never sold out.
yeah, I was lucky to see him once in concert. But so now that we've solved the history of what went wrong, at least in the 90s,
Yeah.
before things went really wrong in the 2010s, what is it that made you decide to get into writing comics? Because I mean, you could do novels, you could do movie scripts, you could do any number of things. What is it about comics specifically that made you say that's what I want to do?
All right. Another long answer, if you don't mind. Um,
No problem.
little bit personal, a little bit philosophical. So first of all, I grew up with comics. And I always had an itch with them. Always had a bone to pick with them. Uh, I loved Chris Claremont. I found him verbose though. And this
Yeah.
sounds like blasphemy too, but I mean the Jim Lee Chris Claremont run. It's not an easy read, and it's not really a fun read. It looks great. Frank Miller, grew up on him. Strange, like I had two older brothers, so you always get to see Predator when you're like 6 and stuff like that. All those things you shouldn't, and you just wow, okay. So I read Sin City kind of early. Read Neil Gaiman's Sandman kind of early. I'm just saying this because those were the big standouts at the time. Ninja Turtles, of course, but I always had this kind of itch, and I didn't really know what it meant. And grew up, became a musician, did a lot of that, went to school for that, and wrote a novel. The first thing the Godfoe Universe ever made was we actually wrote a 90,000 word novel that takes place at the end of the universe that we might be releasing this year or so. We kind of sat on it for about 3 years. And then I still couldn't get that itch. I was still trying to figure out what it was. And Josh and I started talking, and we kind of realized that there was like a comic we wanted to read that we couldn't find. So we decided to make it. And that itch had always been as a musician. Like it's easy for me as a musician to hear something and be like, oh, we could do this. Like we could articulate this better. Or I would like to hear that. And I haven't heard that before. And that's a big, bold statement, I know. But like, even when I read comics now, that itch isn't scratched unless I make it. But what really and this is getting personal, and I hate telling this story. I feel like I tell it a lot, and I don't try to get personal because I don't like when it feels like guys get personal to sell books. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But this is the truth. 2020, my family, my wife and I, we lost about 5 or 6 people. And none of them to COVID except one. It was just different things. But the main thing is 2020, my brother went outside my parents' house and he shot himself.
Ooh.
And he was 40 years old. He was a little bit older than me. And when that happened, I basically like called up Josh and was like, that's not going to be me. And Josh was feeling that itch too, because he's a little bit older than me, and he was really ready to quit his teaching job. He'd been teaching for 17 years. And we both decided like, hey man, like we're going to work on this thing together to get through like the crap of life together. And that's when we really buckled down. We had been shooting ideas back and forth for 10 years, but that's when we buckled down. I finished Apollyon, that script. We talked about Kolga for like another year or two. We finished that, and we never looked back. So from an artistic sense, there's styles I've always wanted to read in a book, in a comic book. And I'm really proud to say with Kolga, we captured it. And I will be very bold and say Kolga reads very well and very interestingly. It is not slow and sluggish, and it is not a breeze. We found a way to pace it very well. There's dialogue, there's monologue, and like I said, there's an internal monologue at the top that contradicts itself and the story so well. It's almost like there's 2 or 3 narratives happening at once, and it's not confusing. I really feel like we accomplished something very well with this book, especially with the pacing and the reading. Josh's art speaks for itself. I don't have to talk about the art. And the reviews, I think, speak for themselves. I'm very, very confident and very happy with what we accomplished. I haven't read a comic that reads like Kolga. And that's a bold
Hmm.
statement, I know. It's a very bold statement, but I will defy someone to read it and not at least be technically impressed with it.
Hmm.
May not like
Interesting.
it. People, there's things people don't like. I get it.
Well,
It's well written. It's good.
there's books for everyone, and there's books that are not done poorly, but for whatever
Mhm.
reason people don't like it. And so before we get back to Koga again, you said one thing I got to jump on because nobody else seems to notice it, and that was that Claremont Jim Lee run of the X-Men.
Yeah.
Um, so do you know a guy on Twitter goes by the Claremont run? And
Maybe. I don't
like,
I think so. I think so.
so he's a guy who was doing his PhD thesis on Claremont's 15-year run on
I'm
the X-Men,
sorry.
and he was publishing results on Twitter. And I had him on the channel several years ago, and I mentioned it that Claremont and Jim Lee didn't like each other, and you could tell in the books. And he's like, "Oh, what do you mean? They get along great. They're together at Comic Cons." It's like, yeah, maybe now, but you
Yeah.
look at those books back then, and
Mhm.
it's like, Jim. Come on, like my favorite X-Men artist was Mark Silvestri, but Jim
Yeah.
Lee was freaking fantastic. Like every
Yeah.
frame is gorgeous, and you would see like you'd have a face like this, and then like all around it would be
Yep.
surrounded by word
Nothing but
balloons.
words.
Like, you can't tell me that Chris Claremont didn't do that on purpose.
That's I have to agree with you on that. And of course, Jim Lee, impeccable artist. In my opinion, probably the greatest cover artist ever. Like to do, I have like 3 of them up here on my wall just for the covers. But I have to 100% agree with you. And like, what's funny is like that guy's writing a PhD thesis and doesn't know that. It's like, well, that's the state of academia as we speak. But yeah, Claremont, especially for that run, like, I mean, my God, that first issue is so hard to get through. It's such a slog. And so much of it is Magneto like monologuing. It's like,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like I
The
get it, man.
the new series for sure. But
Yeah,
even yeah, it was interesting because there's a movie, I think it's called Claremont's X-Men.
yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, in it, like around that time, they're talking about how corporate's given Chris Claremont a bunch of problems. And you even see Rob Liefeld there, and he's like, oh, well, the people who were working on it, they were burned out. They were done. It needed new blood and this and that. And it's
they
like,
needed young blood.
but like, you can't tell me that Jim Lee and maybe Rob on his when he took over New Mutants, you can't
Yeah.
tell me that they weren't pushing their ideas to the
Oh yeah.
editors. And then Chris Claremont, who had built this thing from a nothing book that
Yeah.
had been canceled to the greatest selling book of all time. You can't tell me that Chris Claremont wasn't like, yeah, well, F you, I'm gonna
Yep.
like that's
I'm
his way
Chris
to get
Claremont.
back. Um,
Yeah, that
ah,
definitely picks up in those issues.
it's yeah, it is quite interesting.
What's also funny and sad about that documentary is by the end of it, how many like sycophants are just surrounding him in his old age.
Yeah,
And they're like usually like these young writers that are there and are speaking so highly of him and all he did. And it's like when you look up those people, like they didn't really have great careers. Like I'm not trying to be mean, but it's like I don't know who any of these people are that are like surrounding and talking about him, but they seem to really like sucking on his light that's coming off.
yeah. Well, did you ever read? I don't remember when it came out, but he came back to the X-Men at one point, and they had
Really?
him. Well, I guess he wrote the regular one of the X-Men book titles, the regular one, and then they had him do another one where it picked up
Oh
right where he
really?
left off. Yeah. And in my opinion, they weren't very good. So if you were you know, harboring a secret wish that, oh, if only he could have finished, and
Nah.
It didn't end up well. I mean, I think part of, any type of genre like music, like you mentioned with grunge,
Yeah.
which, a lot of that stuff was my jam too, or Claremont and his X-Men and the whole late 80s lineup of Marvel comics. Like everything sort of has its own time,
Mm-hmm.
and then for one reason or another it ends, and you hope that you can go through, like, if you look at comics, you had the golden age, you had some of the dark ages in the 50s with the Comics Code Authority, start to pick up again with the 60s, 70s, 80s. They started taking themselves seriously. You got great titles. uh Early 90s, and then quickly went away. It's like you hope it can it's a system that will reinvigorate itself. So
Yeah.
periodically it's going to pick back up. Whereas I don't know. Do you see any hope from the mainstream comic industry?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting topic, and I actually saw you and Tyler. I don't know his last name.
Oh,
Us discussing that, and he kind. I didn't get to finish it, but he kind of went into it a little bit. Um, but I would go further, and I think I'm glad you brought that up. I think he kind of, like I said, he kind of went into it, but I think he should have gone further. DC and Marvel aren't comic companies anymore; they're IP companies.
yeah.
I don't think they care about the comics. I think that's the big problem. I think talent's there. Maybe not 100% everybody there, but I mean, you've got guys like Daniel Warren Johnson and Sean Gordon Murphy. Like, those aren't freak accidents. Those guys they don't come from out of a vacuum, you know.
Hmm.
I think a lot of the griping that we all do about modern comics comes from corporate. No overhead, no leaders. There's no Jim Shooters. There's no
Yeah.
guys that with big chests, big hearts, big ambitions, and there's no women in there either in leading. We've kind of lost the Promethean man, and I mean that in like the Ayn Rand sense, and I realize that entire sentence was pretentious as hell. But I mean that, like, I mean that in like her book Anthem, like the self building person, and the self actualized person who has a vision, and I don't want to say strength of will, but I guess I will. Those interesting people just aren't there, and if they are, they're being drowned out by corporate because corporate doesn't care. I think
Hmm.
I think American comics could turn around like that in a
Mm.
second. I think we've got the talent. There's great writers, maybe in comics, maybe not in comics. There's certainly great novelists out right now, and I don't know. I try not to black pill too much. I don't buy modern comics because they're awful. You go out there and they're terrible, and manga is kicking their butts, and that's a whole conversation too with price differences. I understand that's all been said to death before, and there's guys who get paid on YouTube just to complain about it. I get it.
Sure.
I'm not trying to be long winded, but I think these companies care because they don't. Neither one own themselves anymore. They're owned by bigger companies. Those big companies care about IPs. It is much more viable to sell a movie or to sell a T-shirt than it is to sell comics, I think. So I don't think they care. I think they make comics to not have to give up the IP, basically. I think it could
Yep.
be saved instantly. I think talent is there. I think there's a kid right now that in his basement is a little Asian kid that can play guitar better than Steve Vai. There's a kid right now, 15, 16, that has cooler ideas than anyone in comics right now.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, I mean, I personally think that if we're gonna wait, there was maybe I shouldn't mention the name, but there was somebody I had on not too long ago that said, "Well, the health of the health of Marvel is the health of the industry, and
Uh,
once Marvel
yeah,
turns it around, it'll be fine." I don't see that happening from the big two. I think the industry, there's a few. Some are more technical problems in the sense that,
mhm,
like, one is distribution,
yeah.
because when you and I were young, you could pick up a comic anywhere.
Oh yeah, I picked them up at
Uh,
Walmart, at CVS.
yeah. And another problem is the cost, because the cost of comics used to be fairly insignificant, right? So it was a cheap, disposable medium of
Mhm.
entertainment. And yeah, by the 80s and 90s, you really did have that collector's market, but you need that disposable market to bring in new people first
Yeah.
before they're willing to spend, luxury money on like a premium edition on special paper with extra gatefold thing and stickers and you know um and then yeah, and then you have the writing. You're absolutely right. uh no one at editorial at the big two cares, and it shows in their
Mhm.
products. And I I do think that it could be better, but the question is, is it going to come from them? I think they're going to farm out their IP to other companies to produce the comics. I think it's coming very soon. So it would have to be people on the independent side who somehow get together to form a publishing company. And maybe we're starting to see that with crap, I can't think of the name. Image is publishing their books now.
Ghost Machine?
Yes, Ghost Machine, like
Yeah.
something like that. Maybe they could, but they would still have to solve the distribution problems because
Mhm.
manga is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's online. It's relatively cheap. It's in libraries, um, but
And,
so that's
the
a big thing.
well, the thing with it, and I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry, but, like,
Mhm.
this is what I was thinking when I saw the interview, with yourself and Tyler was because he's great at marketing, and like I said, I'm not trying to beat down the guy, like, I wish I could have been part of that conversation. I was thinking he kept talking about marketing. The thing is, though, DC and Marvel don't have to market. When you don't have to market when you're on a lunchbox. That's marketing. Like, it's done. They've won American culture. They make all their money from merchandise all the time. You can't walk into a
Yeah,
Target without seeing something Marvel, something DC. It that's just they're Mickey Mouse.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Manga still has not reached that, and they are very
Hmm.
close. Like My Hero Academia is very close to that, and stuff like that. But it's not that. Like I said, I'm not trying to defend the big two. It's just I think especially in the indie sphere, people don't realize, man, when you grow up in the soup, you don't see that you're in it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
but if you go somewhere, like if you go to Japan, they're selling Superman, they're selling Spider-Man over there.
Yep,
And it's just as big over there. Like what was it? The Beatles said they sold more records in Japan than they did in like Europe.
yep.
And
That's true.
that's never changed. And what's funny is they not to connect everything to music, but the Beatles sold in Japan because they were big in America, not because they were big in England.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say I 100% agree with you. I don't think. I mean, I'm not going to go off on a big tangent like this, but even if someone like Eric July with the Blaze, a multi-million-dollar company backing him, there is not going to compete with Marvel and DC. There's
Yep.
no way that former like even like CG or like Iron Age guys, like former workers are, or like I said, or any indie is going to compete with them. Now I see Doug Ernst is in the chat, and Iconic Comics is doing great. They're doing
Hmm.
massive. Like they're probably the single most impressive indie comic company I've ever seen, and I would say more so than Image because none of them came from comics.
Yep.
And literally now they have a fan base in Japan and they're building it up. But they have no delusions of competing with Marvel and DC and taking over the American zeitgeist or the Japanese zeitgeist. That's not going to happen. I think it's kind of cool to be punk and stay that way and stay smaller without delusions of grandeur. I mean, again, Image couldn't do it. Image had to mark out their own place, which is basically McFarlane, and the other guys were eaten back up by the machine.
Yeah. I mean, well, Silvestri did all right.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I'm not saying that in a degrading sense. I feel
but
like maybe
he's
I
the
should
only.
phrase it better.
Yeah, yeah. I take your meaning. I mean, Top Cow and McFarlane are kind of the only two that are still. I mean, unless you want to count Savage Dragon, but the
No,
less
no one
said about
counts.
that one, the better.
He's, I don't think Eric himself counts as having tracking.
But
um, but also McFarlane's business model isn't really comics.
yeah,
It
yeah,
kind of is, but it also is. He's one of the big two now in that he makes their toys, their
right,
IP.
right.
So he makes money from them. They also make money from him. Like,
Yeah,
I don't mean that
yeah.
mean. It's just that's reality.
Todd's kind of an interesting case to me in that whole thing because for years he complained about treatment at Marvel.
Yeah.
Fair enough, he was getting a raw deal, but then he had the opportunity to make his own books, and he only lasted like 8 issues before he got other people to write them. Like,
He's not
you
a
know what
great
I mean?
writer.
Like right now, I have years worth of materials, and I haven't even
Yeah.
published one thing. Like in the, how many years? Like from the early '80s, he was trying to get into comics. Like you don't have at least 10 years worth of stories to put on there, and then it's kind of weird too. Like out of them, Silvestri seems like the smartest one because he got other people to write for him, other people to develop books for him.
Yeah.
Like and I kind of wondered why the others never did that. He was the one who seemed to be cognizant enough to say, like, I really can't do all this. I need to get other people to make my dream
Hmm.
work. And then he helped other people to fulfill their dreams. And of course, I'm sure Top Cow gets a good percentage of those books. Um, so yeah, I mean, the question is why couldn't they do that? But yeah, it's interesting your point about Marvel and DC and marketing. Um, what do you think happened that these companies couldn't convert some of the largest selling movies of all time into any sort of sales?
Um. Well, we say that we. I think it goes back to comic sales. Like, I think they don't care. I think they make more money off of a T-shirt and a mug, and a lunchbox. I because I don't think the heart's clearly gone from those companies. Disney owns one, WB owns the other one, don't they? Like they were already
Yeah.
corporate machines, and now they're corporate juggernauts. I think it's bottom line to them, and I think that's um. I mean, and I think even Mark Millar had a problem articulating that a little bit because he clearly has a heart for comics,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I don't think he will either say it or doesn't know. I don't know the man's heart. Um, that the big two don't. The big two don't. They don't care, and they're just they. The big two doesn't even exist anymore. Like I said, it's Disney and WB. There's no big two anymore. It's it's Disney and
Yeah.
WB. Those are the big two now.
Yeah. I mean, that's to me, that was like the biggest missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, you're Disney, right? You basically own these theaters. Like if
Yeah.
they want to show your Avengers movie, they have to do whatever you want. Why couldn't you get spinner racks? There's always that long hallway when you're walking out of a theater, right? Why
Yep.
don't you have spinner racks right along there? You have one cheap version, which is a comic adaptation of the movie, and
Yep.
then next to it, you sell like the trade paperback of whatever that movie was based on, like
Yep.
Civil War. Okay, you have a $2 or whatever the cheapest you can make it um, book that's a floppy, and
Mm-hmm.
then next to it you have like the original Marvel Civil War trade paperback. Like, you would do you know how much you would sell just kids leaving and seeing all that? I don't understand why they never thought of that as merchandise as well. Plus they own all the rights to all that stuff already. You just got to reprint it.
Well, part of it, I'm saying this is probably their mentality though, and the only reason I'm saying that is because I'm thinking of as if I were a greedy pig. Like, so I think they've got some guys crunching numbers, and the bottom 10 items that don't break the bank, they cut off. They don't care about. And part of that is probably because, look, if they make a child's book about Elsa from Frozen,
Hmm.
that's all in house. If they reprint the Claremont run, they've got to pay Jim Lee. They've got to pay Chris Claremont. It may be
Mhm.
peanuts, but when you've got greedy pigs crunching numbers, those peanuts in their head add up. That would be my guess. And I just don't think they care. And companies that size, and this is going into a whole other thing, but it turned out to be true, they don't make money from products anymore. They make money from ESG and other investments.
Yeah.
They get paid to create product, but not to sell product. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's such unfortunate timing that those movies blew up when they did.
Yeah.
And that, because I mean, I don't know if you remember, but in the 80s, I know you're more of a 90s kid, but in the 80s, every big movie had a comic adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana Jones, the Star Wars, the Care Bears movie, all that stuff, they had comic adaptations. And it's like the time when comic book movies finally get good,
Yeah.
they can't even have it.
Yeah, it's at least we get toys still. And I think again
Yeah.
that's probably the pigs crunching numbers and realizing they can make more money from toys than comics. And the comic problem, I'm gonna say this, and everybody please stick with me because I'm not blaming consumers. I'm a consumer and I complain about price too. If you'll buy a lunchbox, a mug, a toy, you will pay, whether you know it or not, you will willingly pay a higher profit margin to the company for making it.
Hmm.
Comic fans will not do that for a monthly comic. And I
No, for
say
monthly, no.
rightfully so. But the markup price on the lunchbox is higher than the comic because the comic fans will not pay it the markup price.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I talked about this a little with Tyler, is
Yeah.
that I think that there has to be a high-low solution.
Yeah.
And the low is you want to deliver the absolute cheapest product possible. But on the high end, I think like we see people paying 25 bucks, 35 bucks for a comic plus another 10 bucks for shipping.
Hmm.
There are people willing to pay that. So you need to order, not order, you need to have like a luxury product that goes with that. So that's why, it irks me that we haven't gone back to, with the exception of Alterna, we haven't gone back to newsprint,
Yeah.
you know? Do whatever you got to do to sell that book cheaper, or just online or something, and then eventually you print it in like a nicer book with thick matte paper, the highest printing quality. Oh, and we're gonna have like behind the scenes where the artist has their character sketches that describe how it went, and maybe
Hmm.
we'll have actual pages from the comic script, and maybe you'll get a special story or two that you couldn't get in the floppy version. I mean, I think that there's ways you could do it, just that nobody's doing it.
Oh
And
no.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
like everybody is trying to do more of the high end market without really doing those perks,
Yeah.
um, and without having that low end available.
No, I 100% agree with you. What I was just saying is to the pig types,
Yeah.
this profit margin is greater than this, and
Yep.
following the McDonald, I forgot the guy who pioneered it with McDonald's, but the McDonald's method is you take like the lowest, I forget what they call it, like the lowest return on revenue or return
Hmm.
on investment, and you cut it out, and you
Yeah.
do that until you lower your products down to X. X is what makes the most money per percentage per made, and then you just sell that. Um, which I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. That's skeezy. I mean, hey, I'm here selling a full color 100-page comic for $15. Believe me. uh, I mean, it's manga size. We like that size. We think people will like it. That's how we got the price down for people.
Yep.
And we always give away the first chapter for free to everyone who signs up to the pre-launch. And
Nice.
if you go to our site, godfoeuniverse.com, we are always giving stuff away. We've got free short films from the Apollyon 20XX era. We work with a wonderful photographer slash videographer named Colin Finlayson. He's a local friend of ours. Brilliant, brilliant photographer and videographer. Um, we got the Apollyon 20XX Lamentations and Revelations. That's about 150 pages of content people can just read for free. They can be purchased as PDFs for like $1 a piece, something like that, but they're on the site for free. We love doing the low cost option. We love giving stuff away. We're going to give away a free mini poster slash postcard of one of the Kolga covers that we're not using as a cover for this book. We love giving people stuff, man. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, it's interesting, especially with this whole crew of, indie people. You've got, well, Doug and Tim and
Hmm.
Mark Pellegrini. They're on the publishing end, but when like 10 years from now, what more can you do? And all these things that you did at a cheaper price in the beginning become more valuable.
Yeah.
um, and also, as an indie producer, we have more luxury in that, once we pay for that initial, the ungodly cost to produce something up front, like, you can print it again a million times and
Hmm.
keep making money on the same thing. So your margins end up getting better.
That's the thing is, you've got to be in it for the long run to make something that people will still want to buy in 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and again, while we're praising them, here's the history of Godfoe Universe LLC as an actual business. We spent a year online while we were working on our book, just studying indie comics, and boy, did we find a lot. But um, a lot of people are mad all the time. But
Yep.
we based our entire model off of Iconic Comics. We
Hmm.
were like, these guys get things out quickly, they get quality done, they get it shipped, and they have their books done before they go up. We do that exact same model. Our books are 100% done before they go up for
Oh,
sale.
nice.
Yep, Josh works his butt off. He's put out over 300 pages in a year. Um,
Damn.
Yep, in fact, you can the top tier there is our catch-up tier is actually $35 for Apollyon, which is 175 pages, and Colga, which is 100 pages, so it's almost 300 pages for $35, $5 flat shipping. You won't find a better deal in comics.
That is a
And
good price.
it is. And he's already started on Apollyon 2, which should probably be out by December. And Colga
Wow.
2, yeah, I'm about halfway done writing Colga 2. That'll be out next spring. So we can. What I was trying to say is consistency. That's the other thing with
Mhm.
Iconic is consistently put out. That's the dangerous thing with indie comics, man. Nobody, and I understand it. You don't want to back a book that might be less than 60 pages, and you don't know if the five guys that worked on it are going to be together or put out another book by the time, like, do you get finished reading that one? You,
Yeah.
you might wait 3 years to get part two of a story. It's like, no, we want to drop big, long volumes that we know are done. We've written them out in our head. We've got it spaced out, but you have to prove that to people. And Iconic really did that. Like I said, our model's a little bit different. Our books are a little bit longer, but Iconic did that really well. With like, look, we're gonna pump. I think they pumped out like 4 or 5 volumes in like a year and a half, 2 years, and that proved to their audience you are getting this story.
Yeah, for
Yep.
sure. And also, you know, each book was a complete book on its own.
Yep.
It wasn't like, okay, here's 60 pages.
Yep.
We now have the build up so I can start telling this story, which I'll totally do in the next book.
It's
That
it's that South Park George R. R. Martin. The dragons are coming. The dragons are coming. I swear. Like,
So how many books do you intend to put out a year? Do you think putting out 2 books a year is reasonable for a long term, or
yeah, I mean, we've done it. We put out Apollyon December of last year, January of this year. We put out Colga this year. Apollyon 2 will be done by December or January. Um, and that's Josh doing about 6 hours a day in the afternoon. He works half
wow.
the day, and then he works on comics, and that's also him working on other. He works with Legacy Comics. That's an indie publisher. He does books for them, books for other people too. I mean, he just draws his butt off. We'd like to get up to 3 or at least 2 big books like this, and then maybe some floppies, kind of like how Alterna Comics does it. We do like their
Mhm.
model as well. Peter has built a remarkable business basically from the ground up. Um, and so we've got some characters we thought could do some floppies, and we're gonna Apollyon's gonna be about 5 volumes, 4 or 5 volumes. Kolga's gonna be 4 or 5 or 6 volumes. We've got it written out. We just gotta, when you actually go to space it, things can shrink or grow.
Yeah.
They got the novel, 90,000 words done, which is about 200 to 300 pages. That's just done. We got a video game that's a prequel to Kolga that I'm about 75% done with. That should be out in the next few years. Short films as we put them out, a blog that we go through, all the peripheral media stuff. Like I said, the Revelations, Lamentations, people can read online. We're always going to be putting out that kind of stuff. We're putting out the Biophile Codex, which is Kolga's writings and backstory that she collected on the different members of her initiative, and that's already at 50 pages of prose. We don't sleep, man. We really did create a massive universe. We spent 10 years building it, and the world can suck, man. The world's not in a great place, and you can make money. If I wanted to make money, I would stay in IT, which is the business I'm in. I could make 6 figures a year in this field easily.
Hmm.
With like 2 certifications. And I'd get paid to take those certifications. I've got 2 children. Josh is in youth ministry.
Oh.
We just want to make something cool, man. And if like we do believe that this campaign will fund. If it doesn't, we've got the means to fund it, the rest of it ourselves. People are getting this book. I mean, and we sell more at conventions once we have the physical copies than we do online anyway. So we're in it for the long run, man.
Uh, so you've got this whole universe, at least mapped out. You got a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of books ready to go. Is this your how would I say? Do you see yourself only working on this universe for the foreseeable future, or do you say, sometimes I need to palate cleanse, and I have like a little side project going on, or how does that
um,
work for you? Are you just like you got the blinders on and that's it?
I do for the most part because we've got enough material brainstormed for about 30 or 40 years. We've got at the front of every book you'll see a timeline, and it's got eras. That's what we call the different time zones that the book takes place in. Like Apollyon 28X is an era, Kolga Biophile is an era, the Black Star is an era, and there's different things like that. And within those eras are also offshoots. Like we already have a book that's an offshoot
Ah,
of Kolga that's already going. I mean, I'm in 2 bands. I'm in one called Blue Bolt. We kind of do stuff like it's like Rush. It's like 9-10 minute
oh,
songs. It's kind of
nice.
like prog rock. And I've got one called Pentecost. That's just me. It's more punk. I'm putting out like 2 records this year. Um, I'm always working. Josh is always working as well. If I ever reach the end of the Godfoe universe, I'd probably be worried. Josh has written several horror short stories that are fantastic. Josh is a wonderful
Oh,
writer
nice.
as well. Um, and that's great for us to have because we write everything together and then I script it. Like I actually write it out. It's my voice, if I have to say that. And then he draws it. And but he's got a whole other universe he's working on. Oh, I forget the name of it, but it's cool. I've read the first chapter of it, and he might turn it into a comic. He might turn it into a prose novel. But um, yeah, and that picture you're showing right there, that's the free postcard / mini poster that people will get. The first 50 physical backers will get for free.
Oh, cool.
Mhm.
So you have this long-term plan, which hopefully you're going to see growth, whether it's steady or comes in spurts. Do you see a point where you and Josh say, okay, we're big enough now, we have to start bringing in other people to help, uh, with different aspects of making the book, whether not necessarily the writing or the penciling itself, but maybe other aspects of it? Or do you say, nope, just the two of us, we're going to do our thing? And
We've discussed those two sides of things. We're open to other artists. We would have to have a very particular talk with them because artists are artists are like musicians. I say that because I am one. You can find guys that are unbelievably talented and they can't complete something on time, and you can find guys that are have the heart of a lion, but they can't do their skill to save their life. You know, and they
Yeah.
seem to come in those two extremes. But we know Josh would be open to other artists for other books because we got stuff we want to work on, but we intend to keep everything very tightly close to the chest and very controlled on the business side of things, the two of us, because we want 100% control. We actually, we signed an NDA or whatever. We were with a smaller publisher at one point, and things fell through because creative, we couldn't have creative freedom, and we
Mhm.
couldn't even have marketing freedom. And we're like, no, man,
Mm.
and this isn't us being jerks, but like we want to be more punk rock than this, and
Yeah.
we're not gonna charge X for Y, and we're not gonna charge Y for Z and things like that. And it fell through. I can't discuss certain parts of it, but no, we want to keep it very tight, very controlled, not because we're megalomaniacs, because again, like we're both musicians. We've been in bands our whole life. Like the more people you add to a pot, usually the worse it gets.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So speaking of being a musician,
yeah.
as a writer, do you listen to music when you write?
This sounds lame. Recently, I've been listening to a ton of ASMR.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
When I do prose, I listen to a lot of music. I listened to Metallica's first S&M record like for probably 6 months straight when I was writing the novel. Um, I love that album. I I can talk about the merits or non-merits of Metallica's music, but I love that album. I listened to a lot of Tool during that time. Um, I usually don't though. I try to keep, and this again. Oh my gosh, I sound. I know how I sound. I get it, guys. I went to study music in art school and all that crap. I know how I sound, but like I I'm so moved by music, it's hard for me to focus if I'm really listening to it.
Mm.
The only time I really cry is if I'm listening to music. Like my wife's like, "I've never seen you cry. Like all this horrible stuff's happened, and like your dad died." And I was like, "You haven't seen me in the car with Willie Nelson by myself, you know."
Uh, so the dungeon minister has a question. What category of ASMR? Yogurt container tapping or
I searched ASMR for headache, and whatever comes up. That's usually what I
oh,
listen to because it's very
interesting.
chill, very low. It's usually some woman talking very softly about sage or tea or something. Um, Not the weird stuff. No, I'm not into the. If I wanted pornography, I would just search pornography, not ASMR.
That's very interesting because I like listening to music when I write.
Yeah,
And if it's y- like if I can often use music to try to get me into a certain emotional state
yeah,
that I want to impart on that part of the book. So like if I want if I'm writing a scene that takes place in India or something, I'll put on like Indian music
yeah,
or like that gets me in that mindset. But when I'm writing like dialogue and stuff, I can't do anything with lyrics because my mind will drift too much.
yeah.
So I have to go like to the lo-fi hip hops. That's just like
The girl studying.
yeah, yeah. It's like the elevator music for the 2020s.
Yeah. Now,
Um,
I do listen to a ton of music for inspiration. Like if I'm like that, if I'm thinking of scenes or ideas, like and I get most of my creation done in my car, like driving to work or something, and I'm blasting music, and that's usually where like the story elements all fall into place. But when I actually sit down to write, no, I usually have to focus or something like that.
hmm,
Yeah,
interesting.
most scenes come to me during music. Yeah, I'll make playlists for books and stuff like that.
When you're writing the scenes, especially dialogue,
Hmm.
do you make voices?
Oh yeah,
Like, do you?
yeah.
Yeah. So what does Kolga sound like?
I based a lot of Kolga off of Kristen Ritter
Really interesting.
From Breaking Bad and I think she
Jessica
was in
Jones.
Jessica Jones. Yeah, less that character, and more actually a little bit from that, but I really she was in a show called Don't Trust the Bitch in Apartment 23. They only had like
Oh
one
yeah.
season, and she killed it comedically. But her delivery and that vocal style, like she doesn't have a vocal fry. But you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I base a lot of Kolga's personality after her. Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Uh, has it ever gotten to the point where your wife like just looks at you like, what are you doing?
My wife is a very loud normie, and I mean that in the best sense. Like the woman barely knows the internet exists.
Oh, okay.
So Dan does his thing while she is, doing all the important stuff like taking care of kids and all that. No, I take care of the kids, but like she's like, oh, Dan's staying up to do a podcast or whatever, or Dan's getting up early to do that. Like, whatever, have fun. Let me know when it makes money. She wouldn't know Han Solo from Gorbachev.
So you're kind of lucky then.
I would say so, yeah.
All right. So for the Indiegogo, you've got a number of different products. You've got the twofer, the one with Apollyon. Is that how you
That's right.
pronounce it?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
it's Greek. Yeah.
Apollyon and Kolga together for only $35. So about how many pages of comics are the two together?
Almost 300 pages. Apollyon is 178, I think, and Kolga is 100.
So you're looking at about 10 cents a page
Hmm.
for anyone who buys it. So that's a pretty good deal. You've got maybe if you're overseas or whatnot, you've got the digital PDFs, I assume. Yeah,
Yes,
PDFs.
it's a big PDF, but we'll make it work.
um, and of course, special deal if you want more than one.
Yeah, we had people on the last campaign. They want us to sign one, and they wanted to keep one. So
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Um, if somebody wanted to sign one, how would they? Was that one of the options? Did I miss that?
it
Or
wasn't. Which it was people
oh,
we
okay.
knew mostly.
Ah,
But yeah, I mean, I guess if someone wants it, they can just shoot us a message. We'll sign anything. We won't charge for it. That's kind of lame.
okay, nice. And as you mentioned, the book is done. It's
Hmm.
more or less just waiting until the campaign's over, and then you guys will get it on out to backers.
Oh yeah, we got the
Uh,
last one. I think in 10 days, we had it in people's hands.
nice.
Yep.
So has it already been printed?
No, but
No.
if
Okay.
it's anything like the last one, I think the printers got it to us in 3 days. Something ridiculous.
Dang, that's
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
I guess they got that COVID era backlog taken care of.
Maybe that was it.
All right. So, anything else we should know about Kolga?
it's it's a great story. I'm gonna say you're not gonna find anything like this in comics. Watch the reviews if you don't believe me, and I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the audience.
Mhm.
Read the biography or the story pitch in the bottom. I understand it's isolated, it's away from our world. When you read it, it will be familiar.
Hmm.
I'm just gonna say that. People wouldn't have picked up Star Wars unless they had seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
My God, it's called Star Wars.
So for anyone who's interested, pinned to the chat, there is a link to the Indiegogo. It's also down in the description on YouTube. If you're on X, go check out Godfoe_Universe
Yes, sir.
and go see if this one might be for you.
I appreciate it.
So for everyone else, quick announcements. Tomorrow evening, I have Immortal Rising comics coming on. We're going to talk about his fantasy comic, which may at one point be a tabletop role playing game. We'll see. And Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern, I will be on the Basic Experts channel talking about my tabletop role playing game, Empire of the Undying Sun. And Saturday, I saw the Dungeon Minister peek his head in here earlier. I will be on his channel. Right? It is this week. Yes, it is this week for the Nerd Council of Doom, where we will talk about all things nerdy and world domination.
Nice. Those go together.
All right. So, Dan, thanks for coming.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully, we'll see you back again in a little bit. And everyone, go check out Godfoe Biophile Colga.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.